The plane hummed like a giant sleeping animal, steady and low, as clouds rolled past the oval windows. Overhead lights were dimmed to a soft gold. Passengers shifted in their seats, half asleep, half bored. The way people get when they believe nothing unexpected can reach them at 30,000 feet. In the back row, a man in a gray maintenance uniform wiped his palms on his pants and stared at his phone. "Gaddy, don't forget my medicine." The message from his little boy was hours old, but Ethan Miller kept rereading it like a prayer. Then a sharp voice cut through the cabin. "Excuse me, who allowed staff to sit there? Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from today." It always amazes me how one story can travel farther than any plane ever could. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how wide a single moment can reach. Ethan wasn't supposed to be on this flight, not really. He wasn't a passenger with a ticket and a suitcase. He was the janitor airport facilities called in last minute because someone had reported a spill near gate 12, and then another near gate 14, and then a third in a restroom where a toddler had gotten sick. It was one of those days where the airport felt like it was falling apart in tiny, messy ways. Ethan had cleaned until his shoulders burned. Then his supervisor pulled him aside. "We've got a problem," he said. "A VIP flight, private charter. The client is important. They want someone on board to handle any messes. No delays, no complaints. You're the only one still clocked in." Ethan almost said no. He should have been home hours ago. Noah was with his neighbor, Mrs. Grant, who watched him during Ethan's shifts. Noah had asthma. He needed his inhaler on schedule. He needed his dad to tuck him in with the same bedtime story every night. But overtime meant money. Money meant prescriptions. Money meant rent. So Ethan said yes. Now he stood in the narrow aisle of a sleek, high-end cabin, holding a small cleaning kit like it was a badge of shame. The seats were wider than any plane Ethan had ever been on. The carpet looked like it had never met a shoe. People wore quiet luxury watches that cost more than Ethan's car. He moved carefully, cleaning a small coffee drip near row 6. No one thanked him. No one looked at him. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the woman standing near the front in a cream blazer, hair perfect, eyes sharp like she was always measuring value. Her name was Grace Langford, CEO of Langford Air Systems, an airline supplier empire. The charter wasn't hers, but the people running it treated her like she owned the sky. 2 men in suits hovered near her like shadows. A flight attendant stood stiff. Trying to smile, Grace looked down the aisle and spotted Ethan the way people spot a stain. "Why is he still here?" she asked, voice loud enough to make heads turn. The flight attendant blinked. "Ma'am, he's staff." "He's here to..." Grace cut her off. "Staff belongs in staff areas, not in the cabin." Ethan lowered his gaze. He'd heard worse. People talked down to janitors like it didn't count as talking. The attendant said gently, "He's assigned for sanitation support." It was approved. Grace's eyes narrowed. Approved by who? Ethan's supervisor had sent him. But supervisors didn't matter in Grace's world. Only outcomes did. Only comfort did. Ethan stepped back toward the galley to disappear. But Grace's voice followed him like a spotlight, and he was sitting, she added, pointing toward a jump seat near the rear. Ethan's cheeks burned. He had sat for exactly 2 minutes to drink water and check Noah's message. "That's all." Grace turned to one of the suited men. "Get him off this flight." The man hesitated. "Ms. Langford, we're already in the air." Grace didn't blink. "Then move him to wherever staff goes. I don't want passengers looking at..." That word that hit Ethan harder than any insult. He kept his face blank. He had learned how. He had learned how to swallow humiliation and keep working because no one needed him. A soft voice came from seat 3, "Mom." A young girl leaned slightly into the aisle. Maybe 16. Dark hair tucked behind her ear. She looked pale, like she'd been fighting nausea. Her eyes were gentle in a cabin full of sharpness. Her name was Ava Langford, Grace's daughter. Grace's expression softened instantly, like flipping a switch. "Honey, lie back." "You're fine." Ava's hand tightened on her blanket. "I don't feel good." The flight attendant moved closer. "Do you need water? Ginger ale?" Ava shook her head, swallowing. Her eyes drifted down the aisle and landed on Ethan's uniform. On his name tag, Ethan. For a second, Ava's face changed like she recognized something. Ethan felt the plane bump lightly, a pocket of air. A few passengers murmured. Ava winced, hand pressing to her chest. Grace stood straighter. "This is exactly why I don't want disruptions," she snapped. As if Ethan caused turbulence. Ethan swallowed hard and said quietly, "Ma'am, I can stay out of sight." "I'm here to help if..." Grace's eyes flashed. "You're fired," she said, clean and cold. "Effective now. When we land, you're done." Ethan's throat tightened. "Ma'am, please. I have a son. I need..." Grace lifted a hand like he was noise. "Not my problem." The cabin went painfully still. Even the humming engine felt louder. Ethan's hands trembled, but he forced them steady. He turned toward the back, toward the galley, toward a corner where he could be invisible until the plane landed and his life collapsed. Ava's voice trembled again. Stop." Grace ignored her. "You should have thought about your son before embarrassing yourself in a first-class cabin." Ethan flinched. Not because of the insult, because Noah's face flashed in his mind's sleepy eyes, inhaler in hand. Trusting his dad to always come back, Ethan took a breath and kept walking. Then he heard the soft sound of someone unbuckling. Ava stood up too fast, swaying slightly. Her hand gripped the seat to steady herself. Her eyes stayed locked on Ethan's back, and then she whispered, quiet, urgent, almost like she was afraid to let the words exist. "He saved my life." If you were there in that moment, hearing the girl say that after her mother fired him, what would you do? Would you speak up or stay silent? Be honest and tell me in the comments. And if you believe kindness still deserves a place in this world, tap like, because sometimes that's the only way to say, "I stand with the good." Grace froze, slowly. She turned back toward her daughter, confusion and irritation colliding on her face. "Ava, what are you talking about?" Ava's eyes filled with tears. Her breathing turned shallow. She looked past her mother, straight at Ethan, and her voice dropped even lower, like a confession meant only for the truth. "He's the reason I'm still here." Ethan stopped walking. Every head in the cabin seemed to tilt toward Ava now. The suited men shifted uncomfortably. The flight attendant's mouth parted in shock. Grace took one step toward her daughter, anger rising like a shield. "Ava, sit down." "You're not thinking clearly." Ava shook her head, trembling. "I am." And as the plane kept moving forward through clouds, the story behind that whisper began to surface, slow, painful, unstoppable, like something buried too long, finally demanding air. Ava's legs shook as she stood there in the aisle, one hand gripping the seat back, the other pressed lightly to her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together. The cabin lights made her skin look almost too pale. Grace reached for her arm. "Sit down," she hissed, smiling tight for the other passengers. "You're causing a scene." Ava flinched at her mother's touch, not because it hurt, but because it felt familiar control disguised as care. She pulled her arm back and looked down the aisle again. "Ethan," she said, louder this time. Ethan turned slowly. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to be part of a rich family's drama at 30,000 feet. He just wanted to keep his job and get home to Noah, yes? He asked, voice quiet. Grace's eyes burned into him. "Don't talk to my daughter." Ava swallowed, tears shining. No, let him. The flight attendant stepped forward, palms up. Ms. Langford, please. Everyone, please stay seated. Grace didn't sit. She didn't soften. She stood in the aisle like a wall. Ava's voice trembled. Mom, you don't know him. You don't know what he did. Grace's jaw tightened. Ava, I don't have time for... You never have time, Ava whispered. The words were small, but they cut. A few passengers shifted, pretending not to listen while listening anyway. The suited men kept their eyes on Grace, waiting for her to win the moment back. Ethan tried to step away, but Ava spoke again. It was last month, she said, and her hand started shaking. When I ran. Grace blinked. Ran? Ava's eyes dropped. After the charity gala, Grace's face stiffened. The gala had been on the news, photos, smiles, a perfect family image. Grace remembered it as a success. Ava remembered it as something else. Ava breathed in and out like her chest was tight. I couldn't breathe, she said. Not like asthma, like panic, like the room was closing. Grace's voice turned sharp. Why didn't you call me? Ava laughed once, bitter and tiny. Because you would have told me to pull myself together, like always. Grace's lips parted, offended. That is not. Ava's eyes snapped up. It is. Silence fell. Even the flight attendant stopped moving. Ava continued, voice cracking. I left the ballroom. I went down the service stairs because I didn't want cameras. I didn't want anyone to see me crying. Grace's face tightened like she was already imagining headlines. Ava swallowed. I got dizzy. I tripped. I fell down the stairs. A ripple moved through the cabin, quiet gasps, a hand covering a mouth. Grace went still. You fell? Ava nodded, tears spilling now. I hit my head. I couldn't move right away. My phone fell out of my hand. I remember the lights above me and the smell of bleach. She looked at Ethan, and then I saw him. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew where this was going. He remembered that night too well. He'd been working late at the convention center doing cleanup. His supervisor had shoved him toward the stairwell because someone reported a mess. Ethan had expected spilled wine. Broken glass. Instead, he found a girl in a designer dress on the landing. Eyes half open, blood at her hairline. Ethan remembered kneeling beside her. Hands shaking. Hey, he'd whispered. Stay with me. Look at me. He remembered calling emergency services with his own phone because hers was out of reach. He remembered keeping her talking about anything so she wouldn't slip into darkness. Ava's voice shook. He talked to me until help came. He kept me awake. He held my hand. She wiped her face. If he hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. Grace stared at Ethan like he'd suddenly become a stranger in a different way. Ethan swallowed. It wasn't, he began. It was just the right thing. Grace's eyes narrowed. Why didn't you tell me? She demanded, spinning back to Ava. Ava's voice turned small. I tried. She looked away. But you were busy. You were taking calls. You said we'd talk later. Grace's face flickered with something guilt, maybe, but it hardened fast into anger. Because anger was easier than shame. So you're defending him because he did his job. Grace snapped. Ava shook her head, furious tears spilling. That wasn't his job. He didn't have to stay. He didn't have to care. Grace turned to Ethan, voice cold. So you're what now? A hero? Is that what you want? Ethan's cheeks burned. No, ma'am. I want to go home. Grace scoffed. Then you should have stayed invisible. Ava's breathing picked up. The tension in her shoulders returned. She looked like she might faint again. The flight attendant stepped in, alarmed. Ava, please sit. Take slow breaths. Grace reached for her daughter again. But Ava pulled away and pointed slightly down the aisle. "There's more," Ava whispered. Grace's eyes flashed. "More," Ava nodded. Her voice dropped so low the cabin had to lean into silence to catch it. "The fall wasn't an accident," she said. "Not completely." Grace blinked. "What does that mean?" Ava stared at the floor for a second, then looked up with a broken kind of honesty. "I didn't just run because I was anxious," she said. "I ran because I heard you talking about me." Grace's body went rigid. Ava's throat trembled. "You were in the hallway on the phone. You said I was a liability. You said I was too sensitive and that it made you look weak." A sharp inhale moved through the cabin. Grace's face drained. Ava's voice cracked into a whisper. "I thought if I disappeared for a while, you'd feel relief." Grace's mouth opened. No sound came out. Ethan felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just a rich family argument. This was a girl carrying pain that money couldn't buy away. Ava wiped her tears and said the sentence that made the room tilt. "I didn't trip. Mom, I let myself fall." Grace's eyes went wide, horror punching through her control. No, you didn't." Ava nodded once, devastated. "I didn't want to die," she whispered. "I just didn't want to feel like a burden anymore." The flight attendant looked ready to cry. One of the suited men shifted uncomfortably, eyes down. Ethan's throat tightened. He remembered Ava's hand gripping his that night, how cold it had been, how desperately it had held on once she realized someone cared. He spoke quietly now. Not to Grace, but to Ava. "You weren't a burden," he said. "You were scared." Ava looked at him and nodded, like those words finally fit somewhere inside her. Grace's voice shook. Why didn't you tell me this?" Ava laughed through tears. "Because you don't listen unless it affects your image." Grace flinched like she'd been slapped, and right here. If you've ever felt like you were too much for someone you loved, you're not alone. Drop a comment. What would you say to Ava if she was your friend? And if this moment is hitting you in the chest, tap, like so she knows someone out there understands. Grace stood frozen, face pale. Hands empty. Ethan stood in the aisle with his cleaning kit, like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and somewhere in the back of the plane. The pressure changed again, another soft bump of turbulence, like even the sky knew something had shifted, because Grace wasn't just hearing a story. She was being forced to see her daughter clearly. And she didn't like what it revealed about her. Grace set Ava down gently this time, not as a command, but as if her hands had finally remembered her daughter was human. Ava's eyes were still wet, her lashes clumped with tears. She held the armrest like it was the only solid thing in the world. Ethan stayed where he was in the aisle, unsure if he should vanish or speak. His heart kept pulling him in two directions, away from this mess, and toward the girl who looked like she might break. The flight attendant, Lena, crouched beside Ava. "I'm going to bring you some water," she said softly. "Small sips, okay?" Ava nodded, breathing unevenly. Grace finally looked up at Ethan. Her voice was lower now, but still sharp. "Why didn't you report this?" "The fall, the rest." Ethan swallowed. "I did," he said quietly. "To the paramedics. To the event security?" Grace's eyes narrowed. "Then why didn't it get to me?" Ethan hesitated. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "they were busy getting her safe. And honestly, you were easy to reach that night." Grace flinched as if he'd said something dirty. Ava whispered without looking at her mother. "He's right." Grace's jaw tightened. She turned away, staring at the seatback screen as if it could give her a different reality. Ethan made a small move to step toward the galley again. He had already lost his job. He didn't want to lose his dignity too, but then Ava's voice came again, small, steadying. "Ethan," she said, "can you stay where I can see you?" Grace snapped her head around. Ava's eyes lifted. Please, just for a minute. The word please hung in the cabin like a fragile thread. Grace could cut it or let it hold Dot. Grace forced her mouth into a stiff line. Fine, she said. 1 minute. Ethan stayed, and in that simple act, him not walking away, the cabin softened. Even strangers felt it. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was a moment where someone might be saved again, not from stares, but from loneliness. Lena returned with water and a small packet of crackers. Ava took a sip, hands still shaking. Ethan glanced down at his phone again. Noah hadn't replied because Noah was 3. But Ethan had a picture on his lock screen. Noah in dinosaur pajamas, smiling wide, inhaler in his hand like it was normal. Ava noticed the glance. Your son? She whispered. Ethan nodded. Noah. Ava's eyes softened. He texted you earlier? Ethan swallowed. He can't text, he said. It was the neighbor. She helps. He reminded me about his medicine. Ava nodded slowly. You're doing it alone? Ethan didn't correct her. Yeah, he said. Ava stared at the water cup. I wish my mom knew what alone feels like. Grace heard that, even pretending she didn't. Grace's hands clenched in her lap. She had built a life where loneliness was optional because she could always buy noise meetings, parties, assistance, calls. But now she saw a different loneliness, the kind Ava carried quietly right beside her. Ava swallowed and spoke again, voice shaky. Mom, why did you fire him? Grace's eyes flashed. Because he was unprofessional. Ethan's mouth tightened, but he stayed silent. Ava's brows met. Because he sat for 2 minutes? Grace snapped. Because this flight is important. Ava's voice rose slightly, cracking. Important to who? Grace froze. Ava leaned forward, tears fresh. You care more about how a stranger looks in a cabin than how your daughter feels in her own skin. Grace's face reddened. Ava watched her tone. Ava's laugh came out broken. My tone? Mom, I nearly died and you turned it into an inconvenience. Grace flinched. The suited men shifted again, uncomfortable. Lena pretended to adjust a cart, but her eyes were wet. Ethan felt the urge to step between them, not physically, but emotionally. He'd seen what pressure did to people. He'd seen what sharp words could push someone into. He spoke softly, to Grace, respectful but real. Ma'am, she needs you right now. Not your title. Grace's gaze snapped to him, rage flickering, then something else beneath it. Fear, that the room was seeing her. Fear that she couldn't control this. Ava closed her eyes for a second, exhausted. Then she said, almost as if she hated that she had to say it at all, Mom, I thought about not being here anymore. Grace's breath hitched. Her hands lifted, unsure what to do. Ava, don't. Ava opened her eyes. I'm telling you because if you don't change, I might not survive you. The cabin went still again. Even the engine hum felt distant. Ethan's chest tightened. He had no right to be here, he told himself. But he couldn't leave this girl with only silence. So he did what he'd done on the stairwell. He offered a lifeline, simple and steady. Ava, he said quietly, look at me. Ava's eyes found his. Ethan continued, you're not a burden. You're not a problem to manage. You're a person, and you matter. Ava's lower lip trembled. She nodded faintly, like she was receiving something her mother had never given her in words. Grace watched, stunned jealousy flickering again. Not romantic jealousy. Something uglier, the fear of being replaced in her daughter's heart. Ava whispered, thank you. Ethan nodded once. Then Ava's shoulders shook and she started crying silently, shaking in her seat like the pressure inside her had finally found a crack. Grace reached for her and stopped because she didn't know how to comfort her own child. That was the moment Grace understood. She could run companies, command boardrooms, control headlines. But she could not control love. Ava wiped her face and whispered something else. Softer now, like a secret she'd been holding. I didn't tell you the whole story, Mom. Grace's head snapped up. What else is there? Ava looked toward Ethan, then back to her mother. The night of the gala? He didn't just find me, she said. He was there because... Ava swallowed hard, because you told security not to call an ambulance at first. Grace's face went blank. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan's stomach dropped. No, he breathed. Ava nodded, tears falling again. I heard you, you said. Handle it quietly, you said. No media. Grace's voice shook. That's not, Ava interrupted, voice breaking. Mom, you cared more about bad press than my blood on the stairs. Grace looked like she'd been punched, and for the first time, the people in that cabin didn't see a CEO. They saw a mother standing at the edge of a truth she couldn't buy her way out of. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? If you have, write yes, and tell me their name, because gratitude should be louder than shame sometimes. Grace's eyes flicked around the cabin, realizing how many people had heard. Her face hardened, desperate to regain control. This is absurd, she snapped. Ava is emotional. She's confused. Ava's eyes flashed. I'm not confused, Grace said abruptly. Enough. Ethan, go back to the staff area, now. Ethan didn't move. Ava's voice turned sharp with panic. Mom, don't push him away. Don't do that. Grace pointed toward the back. Go. Ethan took a breath, then said the calmest thing he could. I'll go, he said. But not because you're ordering me like I'm nothing. Grace's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Ethan's voice stayed quiet, steady. I'm a father. I clean floors. But I'm still a person. Grace's face reddened. You're fired again. Ethan nodded slowly, as if accepting it didn't matter anymore. Then he turned to Ava. You keep breathing, he said gently. You keep choosing tomorrow. Ava nodded, tears on her cheeks. I will. Ethan started toward the back until Lena stepped into the aisle, blocking Grace's view for a moment, and whispered to Ethan, Sir, there's something you should know. Ethan paused, confused. Lena's eyes were wide. The captain just asked for you, she whispered. It's about Ava and the emergency kit. Ethan's stomach tightened because suddenly, this wasn't only emotional. It was urgent. And somewhere in the cockpit, someone had realized the plane was missing something it shouldn't be missing. And Ethan might be the only one who could fix it. Ethan followed Lena toward the front, past wide seats and quiet stairs. People leaned slightly into the aisle to watch him go, this man in a plain gray uniform, walking for wealth like he didn't belong. Yet somehow carrying the heaviest thing on the plane. Grace stepped in front of him near row 2, blocking his path. Where do you think you're going? She snapped. Lena's voice stayed polite but firm. Ma'am, the captain requested him. Grace's eyes narrowed. For what possible reason? Lena hesitated. Ethan answered quietly. For safety. Grace scoffed. He's a janitor. Ethan held her gaze for 1 second. And you're a CEO, he said calmly. But right now, neither title matters. Grace's face tightened with anger. Then the overhead speaker clicked. Miss Langford, the captain's voice came through. Controlled but urgent, please return to your seat. Grace froze. Being ordered on her own terms was not something she was used to. Lena gently guided Ethan forward. Come on, she whispered. They reached the cockpit curtain. Lena tapped lightly and slipped inside with Ethan. The cockpit smelled like warm electronics and coffee. The captain, a middle-aged man named Captain Brooks, turned in his seat and looked Ethan up and down. You're Ethan Miller? he asked. Yes, sir. The captain nodded quickly. We have a situation. Your passenger, Ida Langford, she has a medical note in her file. Severe allergy. Carries an epinephrine auto-injector. Ethan's stomach tightened. Okay, Brooks exhaled. The cabin crew checked the medical kit. The auto-injector is missing. Lena's eyes widened. Missing? Brooks nodded. And Ava is showing signs of distress. She's nauseous, pale, breathing shallow. Could be panic, or could be an exposure. Either way, we can't gamble. Ethan's mouth went dry. How does an auto-injector go missing? Brooks looked uncomfortable. That's what I need to know. Lena whispered. We served a special meal up front, not free, verified. Brooks nodded. Still something's off. Ethan, your supervisor said you're detail-oriented. They said you notice things others miss. Ethan swallowed. I try. Brooks leaned closer. Did you see anyone in the galley near the emergency kit cabinet? Ethan's mind flashed back. The front galley earlier. Grace's assistant, an elegant woman with a tablet opening compartments, rearranging items. Ethan had assumed it was normal Dot, then he remembered something else. Grace snapping at Lena about disruptions, about no mistakes. Ethan's chest tightened. I saw someone, Ethan admitted. A woman, assistant, dark hair. She was organizing. Lena frowned. That's Ava's assistant, Sophie. Brooks's jaw tightened. Get her. Lena nodded and hurried out. Ethan stood there, heart pounding. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This was about a girl's life. Brooks looked at Ethan. If Ava goes into anaphylaxis, we need that injector immediately. If we don't find it, we may have to divert. Ethan nodded slowly. Where is the emergency kit stored? Brooks pointed. Forward galley cabinet, locked, only crew access. Ethan's eyes narrowed, locked. But people with authority get access anyway. Brooks didn't argue. Lena returned with Sophie, the assistant, looking offended and confused. What is this? Sophie demanded. I'm in the middle of Brooks cut her off. Where's the epinephrine injector from the emergency kit? Sophie blinked. What? I don't. Brooks stared. Don't play games. It's missing. Sophie's face stiffened. I didn't take anything. Ethan watched Sophie carefully. Her eyes kept flicking to the side. Not guilty exactly, but defensive. Like someone trained to protect Grace at any cost. Brooks asked again, slower. Did Ms. Langford instruct you to remove anything from that cabinet? Sophie's jaw clenched. No, Ethan spoke quietly. Did she instruct you to tidy? Sophie's eyes snapped to him. Who are you? Ethan didn't flinch. Someone who doesn't want a kid to die. Sophie's lips pressed tight. I reorganize supplies, she said sharply. That's all. Brooks's voice hardened. Where did you put the injector? Sophie swallowed. Her confidence cracked slightly. I put it in the locked service drawer. Which drawer? Brooks demanded. Sophie's eyes darted. In the front pantry unit. Under the beverage cart. Brooks swore under his breath. Lena, go. Lena rushed out again. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. Why would you move emergency medication? He asked, voice low. Sophie's eyes flashed. Because Miss Langford doesn't like things looking messy. She doesn't like special needs items visible. Ethan went cold. Brooks's face tightened with disgust. Get back to your seat. He snapped at Sophie. Sophie hurried out, shaken. Ethan's stomach churned. Ava's allergy wasn't an inconvenience. It was life and death. And someone had treated the medicine like clutter. Brooks looked at Ethan. We'll handle that later, he said. Right now we find it. They stepped into the galley together. Lena was already on her knees, pulling open drawers. She found the injector in a plastic bag shoved behind napkins. There, Lena said, relief and rage mixing. Brooks grabbed it, checked the label. Good, Ethan exhaled, shaky. Is Ava okay? Brooks nodded toward the cabin. We need to assess her now. Ethan and Lena hurried back. Grace was standing again, arguing with a suited man, voice sharp. This is unacceptable, she snapped. Stop causing panic. Ava was slumped in her seat, eyes half closed. Ethan pushed past Grace, voice urgent. Ava, can you hear me? Ava's eyes fluttered open slightly. She tried to speak, but her voice was thin. My throat feels tight. Lena's face went pale. Oh no. Brooks turned to Ethan. Administer it? Ethan's hands trembled. He'd seen auto-injectors in training videos, but he wasn't medical staff. Still, he'd done CPR training. He'd handled emergencies at the airport. And right now, he was the calmest person close enough. Ethan looked at Ava. Ava, he said gently, I'm going to help you, okay? Not if you understand. Ava nodded faintly, fear in her eyes. Grace stepped forward, panicking now. What are you doing to my daughter? Ethan didn't look at Grace. Saving her, he said. Lena checked Ava's wrist pulse, then nodded quickly. Do it. Ethan removed the safety cap, hands shaking, and pressed the injector into Ava's thigh as trained. Ava gasped, body jerking slightly. Ethan held it in place for the right count, then pulled back. Ava's breathing was still tight, but slowly it began to open. Color returned to her cheeks in small steps. Ava's eyes filled with tears. As she looked up at Ethan, her lips moved in a whisper, Thank you. Grace stood frozen, horror and guilt slamming into her face, because now she understood something she couldn't talk her way around. Her daughter's life had been put at risk because of her obsession with control, and Ethan, the man she fired like trash, was the one who just saved Ava again. Now it's your turn. Tell me about one small kind thing you've done lately. Nothing big. Just one moment. Write it below so someone else can remember goodness still exists. Your story might be the light someone needs tonight. Grace's voice shook as she turned on Lena. Who moved it? She demanded. Lena's eyes hardened. Your assistant. Because you told her to make things clean. Grace's face drained. A suited man leaned close to Grace, whispering urgently, Ma'am, we should handle this quietly. Grace stared at Ava, still alive, still breathing, still looking at Ethan like he was safety. And for the first time, Grace felt the full weight of what her quiet handling had nearly cost. Ethan sat back on his heels, breath shaking. He looked at his hands that cleaned. Toilets. Hands that pushed carts, hands that had just kept a girl alive. Grace's lips trembled. Ethan, she whispered. Ethan finally looked up at her, eyes tired, voice calm but edged with truth. Your daughter needed medicine, he said. Not image management. Grace flinched like the words burned, and that's when Ava, still weak, lifted her hand toward her mother and whispered the sentence that cracked Grace open completely. Mom, you almost killed me. Grace's face collapsed. For a second, she looked like she didn't understand the words, like language itself had betrayed her. Then her eyes filled so fast it was embarrassing in a cabin full of strangers. Ava, she whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand. Ava pulled her hand back weakly, not dramatic, just instinctive. The kind of reflex you build when love has sharp edges. Ethan stayed kneeling beside Ava's seat, watching her breathing, counting the seconds like they mattered. Lena spoke softly into the intercom, updating the captain. The suited men hovered, tense, whispering about PR and containment. Grace heard none of it. She only heard Ava's words. You almost killed me. Grace's throat tightened. Honey, no, she said, voice shaking. I didn't. Ava's eyes were glassy. You did, she whispered. You didn't mean to. But you did. The cabin was quiet in the way people get quiet when they realize they're witnessing something real. Not scandal. Not entertainment. A reckoning. Ethan stood slowly, knees aching. He picked up his cleaning kit from the floor, suddenly aware again of how out of place he looked among leather seats and designer coats. Grace turned toward him, voice trembling. Ethan's jaw tightened. You fired me, he said softly. Grace flinched. I know. Ethan looked past her at Ava. I don't care about me right now, he said. She needs medical monitoring. Keep her calm. Keep her breathing steady. Grace nodded too quickly, like she needed instruction because she didn't know how to be a mother without a script. Handed Ava a small oxygen mask and guided her breathing. In and out, Lena murmured. You're okay. Ava's shoulders eased slowly. Grace sat down beside her, hands clasped in her lap like she didn't trust them. She stared at Ava's face, like she was seeing it for the first time without filters. Then Ava whispered something that hurt even more. Do you remember what you said on the phone? She asked. Grace swallowed. Ava, you said I am a liability, Ava whispered. You said I make you look weak. Grace's eyes squeezed shut. I was stressed, she said, desperate. I didn't mean. Ava cut her off, voice tiny but firm. You said it like you meant it? Grace's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at her hands, ashamed. Ethan stood in the aisle, silent, because he knew this part wasn't his to control. This was between mother and daughter. This was the deep part, the part that had been building long before a missing injector. Ava turned her head slightly and looked at Ethan again. You know what he said to me? She whispered to Grace, pointing faintly with her fingers. Grace's eyes lifted. Ava's voice trembled. He said I wasn't a burden. He said I mattered. Grace's throat tightened. She looked at Ethan, and for the first time, there was no disgust in her expression, only guilt and a strange, painful gratitude. The suited man leaned close to Grace. Ma'am, he whispered, we need to control the narrative here. This cabin has witnesses, phones. If this story gets out, Grace snapped, voice suddenly sharp. Not now. He blinked, shocked at being dismissed. Grace turned back to Ava. Honey, she whispered, I'm sorry. Ava stared at her mother's face, searching for truth. Are you sorry because you almost lost me? She asked. Or are you sorry because people heard it? The question landed like a stone thrown through glass. Grace's eyes filled again. I'm sorry because I failed you, she whispered. Ava's lips trembled. You've been failing me for a long time. Grace nodded slowly, as if admitting it broke her pride in a way nothing else could. Ethan shifted, preparing to step back. His job was done. He had helped. Now he should disappear again. That's how it always went. But Lena touched his arm and whispered, stay nearby. Just in case. Ethan nodded. Then a flight attendant from the rear rushed up, face tense. Captain says we may have to divert, she whispered to Lena. Ava's reaction might return. We need a medical landing. Grace's head snapped up. Divert? She repeated, panic rising. No, we can't. We have a meeting. We have. Ava's eyes sharpened, even weak. Mom, Grace froze. Ava's voice was soft. Don't. Grace swallowed, realizing she'd just done it again, putting business above breath. Grace exhaled. Divert, she said, voice breaking. Do whatever you need. Lena nodded and hurried forward to relay it. Ethan watched Grace say the word divert like it was a confession. Like it cost her something? It did, because control was Grace's religion, and she was being asked to surrender it. Ava's eyes fluttered. She looked exhausted. Ethan, she whispered again. Ethan leaned closer. Yeah, Ava's voice was small. Can you tell me about your son? Ethan blinked, surprised. Grace looked at Ava, confused. Why? Because, Ava whispered, he doesn't look at his kid like a problem. Grace flinched. Ethan felt a tightness in his throat. He spoke gently, keeping it simple. Noah's 3, he said. He likes dinosaurs and pancakes. He has asthma, so we keep his inhaler close. He laughs like it's his job. Ava smiled weakly. That sounds nice, Ethan nodded. It is hard, but nice. Ava looked at her mother. Do you know what I like? She whispered. Grace's face went blank. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Ava nodded slowly, like she already knew the answer. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent. Grace's voice cracked. Tell me, she begged. Tell me now. Ava stared at her for a long moment. Then she whispered, I like feeling safe. Grace's face broke, and suddenly, Grace's eyes turned toward Ethan with a realization that scared her. This man knew how to make her daughter feel safe, and she did and single quotes T. If that moment hit you hard, leave it. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. The plane began its slow turn for diversion. Seatbelt signs chimed softly. The cabin shifted, a gentle lean. Grace took a shaky breath and looked at Ethan. I shouldn't have fired you, she said, voice low. I was wrong. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just said quietly, I need my job. Grace nodded quickly. You'll have it. More than that, I'll fix it. Ethan's eyes tightened. Fixing isn't saying it, he said. Fixing is doing it. Grace swallowed. Then I'll do it. Ava watched her mother. Don't promise, she whispered. Show me. Grace nodded, tears falling. But just as the plane descended toward the nearest airport, another message popped up on Grace's phone, one of her assistants, urgent. Bold letters, media alert, passengers posting about CEO fires janitor mid-flight trending. Grace's face went pale. She looked around the cabin, seeing phones angled low, people recording, whispering. Her empire lived and died on stories. And now the story was turning against her in real time. She had two choices: protect her image or protect the truth. Grace's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Ava whispered, barely audible, Mom, please don't lie. Grace closed her eyes. Then she opened them, and for the first time, she chose something she'd avoided her whole life. The plane landed with a heavy kiss of tires on runway, then a long shudder as it slowed. Passengers exhaled in waves. The cabin lights brightened to a colder white. Outside the windows, gray tarmac and emergency vehicles waited like they'd been summoned by fate. Ava sat upright now, still weak but breathing better. Lena kept monitoring her, checking her pulse, watching her face. Grace stood at the front of the cabin as the seatbelt sign chimed off. Her phone vibrated nonstop calls, texts, headlines. Panic.trending. CEO fires janitor mid-flight. Daughter cries. What happened next? Grace's suited advisor leaned in. Ma'am, we need a statement now. A controlled statement. Grace's jaw clenched. Ava needs a doctor, she said. He blinked. Of course. But the brand, Grace snapped, voice sharp. Stop calling my daughter a brand problem. The advisor recoiled. Ethan stood near the galley, cleaning kit still in hand, unsure if he was allowed to step off the plane first, unsure if he should stay until someone told him to leave like a dog. Lena touched his arm. Medical's coming, she whispered. Please stay close. Ethan nodded, eyes on Ava. Emergency medical staff boarded quickly. They moved with calm urgency, asking Ava questions, checking her oxygen, confirming the injection time. Ava answered in a soft voice, looking more embarrassed than anything like she hated being a situation. Grace watched them with an expression that looked like fear and guilt in the same skin. When the medics lifted Ava onto a stretcher, Ava reached out and caught Ethan's sleeve with weak fingers. Ethan leaned down. "Hey," he said softly. Ava whispered, "Don't go." Grace heard it. Her throat tightened. Ethan's eyes softened. "I'm right here," he promised. The medic looked at Grace. "We're taking her to the airport clinic first, then possibly the hospital. We need consent forms." Grace nodded too fast. "Whatever she needs." Ava's eyes moved to her mother. "Mom," she whispered. Grace leaned in, voice breaking. "I'm here, honey." Ava stared at her. "Stay," she whispered. "Not just physically." Grace swallowed. "I will." The stretcher rolled down the aisle and out the door. Grace started after it, then paused when her phone vibrated again. Her advisor held up his own screen. "Reporters are outside," he warned. "If you don't address this, your silence will become a story." Grace's shoulders tensed. She looked toward the open door where Ava had just disappeared. Then she looked at her phone. Ethan watched her face change. Old Grace rising like armor, preparing to spin, to control, to polish. Ava's whisper echoed in her head. "Please don't lie." Grace exhaled shakily and did something her staff had probably never seen. She turned her phone off. Her advisor's eyes widened. "Ma'am," Grace cut him off. "Get the car," she said. "We're going to the clinic." He stared. "The press." Grace's voice turned low and dangerous. "Let them wait." She walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Ethan. "You're coming," she said. Ethan blinked. "I what?" Grace's jaw tightened. "Ava asked for you." "And you—" She swallowed, the words difficult. "You kept her alive?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I can't, just my job." Grace's eyes flicked to his uniform. "Your job is not over," she said. "And your termination is reversed." Ethan didn't trust it yet. Not fully. Words were cheap in Grace's world. He said quietly, "I have a son." Grace nodded. "I know. And I'm going to make sure you can go home to him." Ethan stared, surprised by the certainty in her voice. They stepped off the plane into the airport corridor. The air smelled like jet fuel and disinfectant. As they approached the clinic entrance, cameras flashed. Reporters stood behind a barrier, shouting questions. "Miss Langford, did you fire an employee mid-flight? Is it true your daughter begged you to stop? Was the emergency medication missing?" Grace froze for 1 second. Old instincts screamed, "Run, hide, deny." Then she remembered Ava's face, pale, breathing tight. Grace walked forward to the microphones like she was stepping onto a battlefield without armor. Her advisor hissed, "Ma'am, we don't have a prepared statement." Grace lifted her hand. "I don't want one." She looked straight into the cameras, voice steady but raw. "Yes," she said. "I fired him." Gasps, murmurs. Grace continued, "And I was wrong." The crowd shifted. The story changed shape in real time. Grace swallowed. "My daughter had a medical emergency. The medication that could save her was moved. And the man I fired, Ethan Miller, was the one who found it and helped save her." She turned slightly and gestured toward Ethan. Ethan froze. The flashbulbs hit him like lightning. He wanted to disappear. He wasn't built for cameras. Grace continued, voice breaking slightly. "I treated him like he was less than human. And today, he was more human than I was." The reporters surged with questions. "Why did you fire him?" Grace's eyes shined. "Because I cared more about appearances than people," she said. "And I'm ashamed." The word ashamed didn't fit CEOs. It didn't fit billion-dollar suits. But Grace said it anyway. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. Because when you go public, you don't just confess, you invite consequences. As Grace spoke, her phone buzzed again from inside her bag. She ignored it. The advisor pulled his own phone out and read a message. His face straining. He leaned close and whispered, Board members are furious. They think this makes you look unstable. They're calling an emergency meeting. Grace's mouth tightened. Ethan heard it, and suddenly, the story shifted again from apology to threat. Grace looked at Ethan, then toward the clinic doors where Ava was being treated. Then she looked back at the cameras. Be honest, could you forgive someone who humiliated you publicly and only apologize when the world was watching? Type forgive if you could, or never if you couldn't. Grace inhaled and said into the microphones, I don't care what the board thinks right now. I care about my daughter. Her advisor looked horrified. Grace's eyes stayed firm. If they want to punish me for choosing my child, they can. The crowd erupted with questions again, but Grace stepped away. Heading into the clinic. Ethan followed, stunned. Inside, the clinic was quiet. Ava lay on a bed, 4 in her arm, cheeks less pale now. She looked at Grace as she entered, and her eyes softened just a little. Grace approached slowly. Honey, she whispered. Ava blinked. You told the truth? Grace nodded. Yes. Ava's lips trembled into a tiny, exhausted smile. Good. Grace sat beside her bed, taking her hand carefully this time. Ava didn't pull away. Ethan stood near the doorway, awkward, unsure if he belonged. Ava looked at him. Ethan, she whispered, are you really fired? Ethan swallowed. He looked at Grace. Grace shook her head. No, she said firmly. You're not fired. Ethan's eyes tightened. My supervisor, Grace, cut in. I will handle it. Ethan didn't want handled. He wanted security. Real, written security. Ava noticed his face. She whispered to her mother, Mom, don't handle, do right. Grace nodded slowly, absorbing it like medicine she didn't like. Then the clinic door opened again. A nurse stepped in, face serious. Ms. Langford, she said, there's a call for you. It's the hospital. They reviewed Ava's file. Grace's stomach tightened. What now? The nurse hesitated. There's something you need to know about Ava's condition. Something that wasn't documented correctly. Grace went cold because she thought Ava's crisis was a single moment, an allergy. A missing injector, a mistake. But the nurse's tone said it was bigger. Ava looked between them. Worried, Grace swallowed. Tell me. The nurse took a breath and said quietly, Ava's allergy isn't the only risk. There's a heart condition noted in an old report, and it was never followed up. Grace's world stopped. Ethan's chest tightened. Ava's eyes widened in fear, and Grace realized with horror that her obsession with image hadn't just made her cruel. It might have made her blind to something that could have killed her daughter long before this. Flight. Grace felt the words land in. Her body like ice, a heart condition. She repeated, voice thin. The nurse nodded gently. It's flagged in an older cardiology note. It may explain the faintness and the panic-like episodes. Sometimes heart rhythm issues can feel like anxiety. She paused. The doctor wants to run tests today. Grace's mouth went dry. She looked at Ava, her daughter, lying there within 4, eyes wide. Suddenly aware of how fragile she really was, Ava whispered, I thought it was just me. Grace's eyes filled. No, she said, shaking. No, honey. Ethan stood in the doorway, silent, feeling like he'd stepped into a room where truth was finally too loud to ignore. Grace turned to the nurse. Why wasn't I told? She demanded, voice cracking. The nurse hesitated. It looks like the follow-up appointment was scheduled years ago, but it was canceled. The notes say family requested no further action at this time. Grace went still. Ava stared at her mother, confusion turning to fear. Mom, did you cancel it? Grace's throat tightened so hard she could barely breathe. She tried to speak, but the words refused to come out clean. The answer lived in her silence. Ava's eyes filled slowly. like water rising behind a dam. She whispered. You knew? Grace shook her head fast, desperate. I didn't understand. Ava's voice trembled. Did you not understand? Or did you not want it to be real? Grace flinched as if Ava had struck her, because Ava was right to ask that Grace had lived her life deleting problems, moving them out of sight, polishing over cracks. That's what she did with messes in a cabin. That's what she did with inconvenient truths in her company. Had she done it with her daughter's health too? Ethan's stomach tightened. He'd seen parents miss things because they were tired, because they were overwhelmed, because life was heavy. But Grace wasn't tired in that way. Grace was powerful, and powerful people sometimes believe they can edit reality. Grace whispered, I thought if we didn't label it, it wouldn't follow you. Ava stared. So you hid it. Grace's eyes spilled over. I thought I was protecting you. Ava's lips trembled. From who? From the truth? The nurse stepped back gently, giving them space. The air in the clinic room felt too thin to breathe. Ethan cleared his throat softly. Ava, he said, careful. It's good they caught it now. Ava looked at him, tears sliding down. If they caught it now, she whispered, what about before? Grace's shoulders shook. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Ava turned her face away, crying silently. Grace reached for her again, and this time Ava didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. Her hand lay limp in Grace's, like trust had been drained out and needed time to return dot tests. Moved fast after that dot, they wheeled Ava down bright hallways. Machines beeped. Electrodes stuck to her chest. Doctors spoke in calm voices that didn't match Grace's racing mind. Ethan walked beside the stretcher until staff stopped him at a doorway. Family only, a nurse said gently. Ethan froze. Family only. He stepped back, feeling that old familiar sting being outside the circle. Grace, walking beside the stretcher, stopped and turned. She looked at the nurse. He's with us, she said. The nurse blinked. Ma'am, Grace's voice stayed steady. He's with us. Ethan's throat tightened. Ava's eyes flicked to him, and she gave the smallest nod. So Ethan followed Dot in the waiting area. Grace sat rigid in a chair, hands clasped so hard her knuckles whitened. Her advisor called 10 times. Her phone buzzed with board alerts, meeting requests. Crises. Grace didn't answer. Ethan sat a few seats away, staring at his own phone. A message from Mrs. Grant. Noah's okay. I gave his inhaler. He's asking for you. Ethan's chest ached. Grace noticed his face and whispered, go to him if you need. Ethan swallowed. I can't, he said quietly. Not until I know she's okay. Grace stared at him, something heavy shifting behind her eyes. Ava was her blood. Ethan wasn't, and yet Ethan was sitting here, sacrificing time with his own child because he couldn't walk away from someone else's. Grace whispered, almost to herself, you're good. Ethan gave a tired half smile. I'm just doing what someone did for me once. Grace blinked. Someone helped you? Ethan nodded slowly. When Noah was born, I was drowning, he admitted. My wife left. I didn't know how to be enough for a baby. I was ashamed. Grace's eyes softened. Ethan continued, voice quiet. My neighbor, Mrs. Grant, she's older. She saw me carrying Noah at 3 a.m., rocking him in the hallway because I didn't want to wake other tenants. She came out with a blanket and said, you don't have to be strong alone. Ethan swallowed. That sentence saved me. Ava's test took an hour, then another. The waiting room clock felt cruel. Then finally, the cardiologist came out, a calm woman with tired eyes. Ms. Langford? She asked. Grace jumped up too fast. Yes, how is she? The doctor exhaled. Ava has an arrhythmia condition. It's manageable, but it's serious. She needs medication, monitoring, and follow-up. The good news is, we caught it before a worst-case scenario. Grace's knees nearly gave out. Before anything irreversible, the doctor said gently. Grace covered her mouth and cried quietly, like she was afraid tears would make it real. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief washing through him. The doctor glanced at Ethan. And you are? Ethan hesitated. Just someone who was there. The doctor nodded, then looked back at Grace. You'll need to take this seriously, she said. No more canceled appointments. No more delays. Grace nodded fast. No more, she whispered. The doctor left. Grace wiped her face, then turned toward Ethan with eyes full of exhaustion and something new. Humility. Thank you, Grace whispered. Ethan shook his head. Thank Ava, he said. She spoke up. Grace nodded. Then Ava's room door opened, and a nurse waved them in. Ava lay in bed again, looking tired but calmer. She turned her head and saw them. Grace rushed to her side. Honey, she whispered. They found it. We're going to take care of it. Ava's eyes filled again, but her voice stayed soft. Promise? Grace nodded, swallowing. I promise. Ava stared at her mother for a long moment. Then she whispered, Don't promise like you do to the world. Grace flinched. Ava continued, voice trembling but steady. Promise like a mom. Grace's mouth trembled. I don't know how. Ava's eyes moved to Ethan. He does, she whispered. Grace's throat tightened. If you believe love still wins, comment amen. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive as romance or fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as accountability, as showing up, as doing the next right thing even when it hurts. Grace sat down and took Ava's hand. Teach me, she whispered. I'll be bad at it, but teach me. Ava's eyes filled. She nodded once. Okay. Ethan stood near the window, feeling the weight of the moment. Then Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Mrs. Grant. It was his supervisor. Ethan's stomach tightened as he read the text. You abandoned your post. Termination confirmed. Do not return. Ethan's face strained. Grace noticed immediately. What is it? She asked. Ethan swallowed. I lost my job anyway, he whispered. Ava's eyes widened. Mom. Grace stood up slowly, jaw tightening. Her daughter was alive because of Ethan, and Ethan had just been punished for saving her. Grace looked at Ethan with a new kind of fire in her eyes. Then we fix that, she said. And in that moment, it wasn't about PR anymore. It was about justice. Grace didn't sit back down. She stood there in the hospital room, like a storm held inside a person, quiet, controlled, but dangerous if you step too close. The old Grace would have called an assistant and made a problem disappear. This Grace turned her phone back on. Her advisor's messages flooded in. Board members, legal, PR, all screaming for her attention like children, banging on a locked door. Grace ignored them and dialed one number on speaker. Ethan's supervisor answered with a bored tone. Facilities. Grace's voice cut clean. This is Grace Langford. A pause, then panic. Ms. Langford, hello. Grace didn't let him warm up. Did you terminate Ethan Miller? Ethan's supervisor cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. He abandoned his assignment he responded to a medical emergency involving my daughter, Grace said. On a plane. In the air. He administered life-saving care after your team's negligence left a critical medication misplaced. Silence. The supervisor stammered. We weren't informed. You are informed now, Grace said. Reinstate him immediately. Full pay for this week. And I want an incident report on why he was placed on that flight without proper authority protections. The supervisor swallowed loudly. Ms. Langford, respectfully, he's not an employee of your company. Grace's eyes narrowed. No, she said. He's an employee of the airport, and I'm a major client whose contracts you depend on. If you punish workers for saving lives, I will make sure every executive in your chain hears about it. Ethan stared at her, stunned. The supervisor's voice turned small. Yes, ma'am. We'll review it. Not review, Grace corrected. Fix it. The line went dead. Ethan exhaled shakily. You didn't have to do that. Grace's voice softened, but the steel stayed. I did, she said. Because for once, I want my actions to match my apology. Ava watched from the bed, eyes glossy but calm. Good, she whispered. Grace stepped closer to Ava and took her hand again, careful. Honey, I owe you more than words, she said. Ava's voice was weak. Then don't make it about you. Grace flinched, then nodded. Okay. Ethan shifted awkwardly, ready to leave. I should go, he said quietly. My son. Ava lifted her hand slightly. Wait, she whispered. Ethan paused. Ava's eyes filled with something brave. I want you to meet him, she said. Not now when you can. I want to see someone's family that feels real. Grace's throat tightened. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, he said gently. Okay. Grace glanced at Ethan's phone. Go to Noah, she said. I'll have a car take you. Ethan hesitated. I can't afford, Grace cut him off softly. It's not charity, she said. It's making right. Ethan swallowed. Thank you, he murmured. Grace looked away like the gratitude hurt. Don't thank me for doing what should have been done from the start. Tessa didn't exist in this story, and Ethan didn't have a team. He had one neighbor, a small paycheck, and a heart that refused to turn away. He walked to the hospital lobby with heavy steps. Phone pressed to his ear as he called Mrs. Grant. She answered, warm. Ethan, honey? Ethan's voice cracked. Is Noah okay? He's fine, she said. He's eating crackers and watching cartoons. But he's been asking for you. Ethan closed his eyes. I'm coming. When Ethan reached home, Noah ran into his arms like Ethan was the only safe place left in the world. Ethan held him and breathed him in clean hair. Sleepy warmth, little hands clinging. That night, Ethan tucked Noah into bed and promised him softly, Daddy's here, always. But Ethan couldn't sleep because he knew Derek people like Derek existed everywhere. Different names, same hunger for control. And the world had shown him again how quickly the powerful could erase the quiet. The next morning, a message arrived from Grace's assistant, short, formal. Unexpected. Ms. Langford would like to see you and your son for lunch. Private, no cameras. Ethan stared at the text for a long time. He didn't trust Grace yet. Trust wasn't a switch you flipped because someone cried once, but Ava's face flashed in his mind, her whisper. Her fear, her courage. So Ethan agreed. At the restaurant, Grace arrived without her usual entourage. No shadows and suits. No performance. Just a woman in a simple coat, eyes tired. Ava came with her, wearing a soft sweater instead of designer armor. She looked healthier, already still fragile, but present. Ethan walked in holding Noah's hand. Noah stared at the fancy place like it was another planet. He squeezed Ethan's fingers. Ava smiled gently at Noah. Hi, she said. Noah hid behind Ethan's leg. Ethan chuckled softly. He's shy. Ava nodded. I was too. I still a chum? They sat. For a moment, nobody knew where to begin. Grace looked at the table. Ethan looked at the menu but didn't read it. Ava watched Noah carefully, like she was studying what safety looked like in real life. Finally, Ava whispered, This is Noah? Ethan smiled. Yeah. Noah peeked out, eyes curious. Ava's eyes softened. He looks loved. Ethan's throat tightened. Grace's eyes filled again, but she blinked it back. She reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table thick. Ethan stiffened. "What's that?" Grace's voice stayed calm. "A check," she said. "For the week you almost lost. For the overtime you should have gotten, and..." She swallowed. "For the stress I caused." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't want pity money." Grace nodded. "It's not pity. It's accountability. If I can destroy someone's paycheck in one sentence, I should be able to repair it with action." Ethan stared at the envelope, conflicted. Ava leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Please take it. Not because you need saving, but because you saved me." Ethan swallowed hard. "And if the story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like not for me, but for the soul who did the right thing when nobody was watching and still got punished for it. One click can be your way of saying, 'I felt you.'" Ethan finally nodded once and slid the envelope into his jacket pocket. "Okay," he said quietly, "but I'm still going to work. I'm still going to earn." Grace nodded. "Good." Ava looked at her mother. "Mom," she said softly, "tell him the other part." Grace flinched. Ava's gaze stayed steady. "Tell him." Grace inhaled. "I spoke to the board," she said. "They wanted me to issue a sanitized statement, to blame a misunderstanding, to protect the brand." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And?" Grace's voice shook. "I refused," Ava whispered. She resigned. Ethan froze. "What?" Grace nodded slowly. "I stepped down," she said. "Not because I had to, but because I finally saw what power did to me. And I don't want Ava growing up thinking love is a press release." The table went quiet. Ethan looked at Grace differently, now not as a villain. Not as a hero, as a human who had to choose between reputation and redemption. Ava reached across the table and took her mother's hand. Grace let her Noah suddenly pointed at Ava's wristband from the hospital. "Boo-boo?" Ava smiled, surprised. "Yeah," she said softly. "A boo-boo." Noah nodded like it was simple. Then he offered her one of his crackers. Ava's eyes filled with tears. She took it carefully. "Thank you," she whispered, and the moral settled in gently, like sunlight through a window after a long storm. Kindness isn't about titles. It isn't about who sits in first class. It's about who kneels beside you when you can't breathe and stays until you can. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do isn't command a room. It's admit they were wrong and change for real.